let in the last more people coming in, people popping in like crazy now. Welcome to the January Speakers Night. We have a talk, but more people coming in. I started a little early, apparently. A talk by Max King, who I will let Swapna introduce shortly. His talk is about the New Horizons probe, but I'm really going crazy with people coming in, which is good. That's a good sign, Max. A lot of interest.
Alan,
We will have some.
why don't you appoint a co-host so they can do that?
Yeah, I'll do that as soon as I stop doing this. That would have been a very good idea, John. Actually, interestingly, I tried to do Swapna before the meeting, but you apparently have to buy the license from Zoom so that someone can be a co-host. And so the co-host would normally be, no, he's not on. Oh, yes, Rob is on.
Yep, I'm here.
Make a co-host. There we go.
All right, so I'm the co-host.
Thank you, Rob.
You're welcome.
So we will have some brief announcements following the Q&A session. So Max will give his talk. We will have some brief announcements. And I guess for now, I would like to ask our club secretary, Swapna, to introduce Max.
Hi, welcome, Max. So we're very happy to have you here. Thank you for making the time to speak to our membership. So Max is going to be speaking on Mission to Pluto, from Napkins to New Horizons. So I wanted to introduce Max. He's an aerospace engineer from the University of Toronto, is working on the next generation of space exploration in Canada. He has an engineering experience spanning CubeSats to Canadarm3. Max is passionate about science communication and the impact of science and technology on society. He's a member of Canada's Chief Science Advisors Youth Council, advising on Canadian space policy, as well as an outreach partner at the University of Toronto's Dunlap Institute and the Planetary Society. So welcome, Max. Again, thank you so much for taking the time. I will now hand the meeting over to you.
Thank you very much, Swapna. Thank you, Alan and both, for reaching out to me to organize this. I'm very honored to get to speak with you all this evening. It just before the meeting, I was hearing some big names thrown around there: Brian Greene, Neil deGrasse Tyson. So don't expect the same quality here, but a little less physics. So to those who were disappointed by Brian Greene's lack of physics, there's going to be even less tonight. But thank you all for having me here. So as Swapna said, my background is in engineering, and so I am most interested in the spacecraft and the ships we build for exploration. That's the part of it that I most enjoy. And what I most enjoy about that, even past the nuts and bolts aspect, is the stories that get to come out of that, and that we can help. We explore the universe to not understand it, but to understand our place within it. So tonight, you can put down your notepad. There's not going to be a test. I mostly just wanted tonight share a story. I'm here on behalf of the University of Toronto Dunlap Institute, doing public outreach, and public outreach that I know the RASC is involved in. I myself am a member. I was admitting to Alan before the meeting, my dues have elapsed, so I'll be on that again. I was a part of the Edmonton chapter for many years before I moved here. So tonight, I want to tell you the story of the mission to Pluto, from Napkins to New Horizons. Now, when I brought this up on screen, Swapna, you were exclaiming, it's a beautiful photo of Pluto, and you showed me your your model of Pluto in the background in your office. And unfortunately, we can't start here. We can't start at the end with the magnificent photos. We have to go back. This story that ends at the end of our solar system starts with a postage stamp. So in the 1990s, the United States Postal Service issued a set of stamps. and each of these stamps had one of the major bodies of our solar system on it: Mercury, Venus, Earth, etc. And they had color photos, or photos for all of the objects, beautiful detail. But by the time they were done with Uranus and Neptune, and they got to Pluto, they only had this, an artist's rendering. In the 1990s, Pluto, not yet explored. And it was a long time before this would change. It's only changed within my lifetime and only the last several years. So to understand why we didn't have those photos of Pluto, I want to just lay out how we figured out where Pluto was. When did we discover Pluto? Now, I know I'm speaking to a group of astronomers here, so I will not belabor the roadmap of our solar system, but there are a few details that are worth pointing out. So, in the interior of our solar system, we have the rocky worlds, all the way from the Mercury out to the asteroid belt. Beyond those, we have the gas giants, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune. We can't see with the naked eye, but they were known about before their discovery, or at least their presence was known, because in space, the gravity of every object pulls on everything else. And the perturbations, the pulls and the tugs from Uranus and Neptune can be seen in the orbits of Jupiter and Saturn, and even on the interior worlds. And if you're really careful, and if you're good with your observations, as I think all good astronomers hope to be, we get more and more meticulous, and we'll discover that the perturbations aren't solved. There's still more out there. And this was the case in the 1930s. There were still tugs and pulls on Uranus and Neptune's orbit that could be seen that weren't explained by Uranus and Neptune. And so there was a hunt. A hunt was on for an enigmatic planet somewhere else out there in the solar system. And it would be in the 1930s that this man, Clyde Tombaugh, would be the first person to get verified proof of the planet Pluto. Using a telescope he built himself. Here he is, a very young man, just about 20. And he did this by taking photos of the night sky night to night, looking at the same spot. And if you look at the same spot close in time, at close same time each evening, over the course of a year, you'll see changes, but night to night, you might not see many. And I love this. These dates here just jump over this meeting date, 93 years ago. And I won't make you hunt for it, but this image is out there on the internet. You can find it if you're interested. But on the image on the left, on the 23rd of January, there's a small object that slides over on January 29th. And this was the first telescopic proof of the planet Pluto. You know, it didn't have a name then. We didn't know what we were going to find. But this is the original photograph, or this is the telegraph that was sent to the Lowell Observatory. For the naming of new planet, please consider Pluto, suggested by small girl, for this dark, gloomy planet. Now, Pluto, for my generation, might be connotated with the Mickey Mouse's dog, Goofy and Pluto. But Pluto is the name of the Roman god for the underworld, gatekeeper to the underworld. And that's how we saw this world. That's how we saw Pluto at the time. This emissary on the edge of our solar system, just on the edge of all the darkness between us and the nearest star. So that was in the 1930s. But we're going to flash forward. So in the 1950s and 60s, we took to space with human beings for the first time landing on the moon in 1969. And we sent robotic emissaries to other planets in the solar system. Mariner 10 was the first spacecraft by Mercury in 1974, having just flown by Venus previously to that in the same year, 1974. Going away from Earth in the other direction, Viking 1 in 1975 was the first human spacecraft to reach Mars. and then into the outer solar system. Voyager 1 flew by Jupiter, the largest planet in our solar system, in 1979, and encountered Saturn just the next year. Got us the first close-up image of those beautiful rings. Its sister spacecraft, Voyager 2, flew by Uranus in 1986, and a year later, took these photographs of Neptune. And that finds us all the way back to the 1990s with Pluto, not yet explored. So why wasn't Pluto explored? We'd seen those beautiful photographs. We'd studied Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune. All of these worlds were worth a hefty price tag to get photos of, to study with orbiters and understand what they're made of, what's going on these surfaces. And those worlds are hot. There's the rocky worlds like Mercury and Venus and Earth. There's lots of interesting things going on here because heat lets interesting reactions happen. It lets geology happen, planetary geology. But Pluto, a dark, cold world at the edge of the solar system. We didn't need a billion-dollar photograph or rock. Enter this man. Alan Stern, Mr. Pluto. For those who followed the New Horizons mission when it was going on, he might look very familiar. This was the principal investigator for the Pluto mission. Before this, we were briefly quipping, is Pluto still a planet? This man will defend till his grave that Pluto is a planet. I said not everyone, most people didn't want to study Pluto, but there were a handful. Scientists are an eclectic bunch. There's always someone who wants to study what no one else wants to study. And Alan Stern was one of Pluto's champions. There are others in these stories, as with any story of science and exploration. There are many, many names, but for tonight's sake, we'll just keep it to his. And Alan Stern was part of a group called the Pluto Underground. And what they were trying to do was really push for a spacecraft to go to Pluto. Maybe it's more interesting than we think. Maybe it's not just a rock at the edge of our solar system. So they proposed this in 1991, Pluto 350. Pluto 350 was a 350 kilogram spacecraft that would go and orbit Pluto. 350 kilograms in the spacecraft world is not very much. CubeSats these days are what's sort of dominating the sky. And those are quite small. Those can be on the order of 50 kilograms, some cases much smaller. And this isn't too much bigger than 5 of those put together. So this was a pretty small spacecraft to go that distance. This mission was canceled that same year. So Mariner Mark II was suggested in 1992. And this was another mission based off of existing spacecraft designs, and they would just push them a little bit further to get out to Pluto. That mission was also canceled in 1992. Finally, Pluto fast flyby in 1993 was proposed. In space, you need acceleration to get away from an object, but you also need propellant to slow down when you reach an object. We can't just get to Mars with one thrust off of Earth. We also need to slow down when we get there. And if we don't, we'll fly right past. So you can save a lot of fuel. You can save a lot of your money on your spacecraft if you just have it fly past. You don't get as good of science or as repeatable science. You can't orbit the world. You might just get one face of the world, but you'll get something. So Pluto fast flyby was the compromise proposed. This was also canceled in 1993. So at this point, they would need something close to a miracle if they were going to get the Pluto mission funded. And that is exactly what they got. So going back to our roadmap, remember, this story is taking place over many decades, and the understanding of our solar system is always changing. It's changed in all of our lifetimes. And when they were searching for Pluto, they knew there were perturbations. They knew that there was something still out there, even beyond Pluto. Some people thought Pluto was the whole story. Some people did not. And one idea would change how we see the solar system entirely and how we see our place within it. And that was the discovery of the Kuiper Belt, an entire third zone of our solar system that is made up of rocky, icy, there are many debates, worlds all around the size of Pluto. Something like an object that if you took the whole continent of North America and wrapped it in a ball, about that size. And Pluto just so happened, it's in yellow in this image, just so happened to be this odd outlying gatekeeper, this one weirdly detectable object for the third zone, the underworld of our solar system. And so, with renewed scientific vigor, now that we had concrete evidence of the Kuiper Belt in the 1990s, Pluto Express was proposed in 1994, a mission that would go to Pluto and beyond, explore what else was out there, maybe have a chance encounter with a Kuiper Belt object. That didn't work, so Pluto Kuiper Express was proposed, an object that would for sure have a rendezvous with something else out there. At this time, the United States political office, the presidential office, was changing, and the Pluto Kuiper Express was canceled. Now, that is one theme that runs through a lot of space and space exploration, is you need to have continuous funding, you need to have commitment. And so in the intervening years, there were many sit-down, many proposals drafted, but finally, in 2001, under the Bush administration, the Pluto New Horizons mission finally was funded. They did it. But that just has this, that's the start. So what did they get? They got 5 years to build a spacecraft. They had a team of directly employed 2,500 people. This mission was built between NASA and also uniquely Johns Hopkins University. And so I said before that a lot of those spacecraft, those were built by NASA entirely. Those are, in some cases, $1 billion effort. And this was given a much smaller budget, even accounting for inflation, $700 million. NASA was going to try to send a probe further on a shorter timeline and on a less budget than they ever had. And this changes how you build something. You take a lot more risks. You have to convince yourself a lot more of what you're capable of without hard data, without testing. And this is in some ways a lot of what has paved the way for the new style of developing spacecraft that we see. So I would love to sit down and go through every single or every single instrument on the New Horizons spacecraft. This is a fun thing to do with basically every science probe we send, because we want to get the most bang for our buck. We want to figure out what is the best science, what is the most repeatable, what are the measurements we can do, and what are the diversity of measurements you can accomplish. So we won't highlight everyone tonight, but the two that I am going to go into detail on are LORI, which is pointed to on the front of this image, and REX, which is the large antenna on the top. And for a sense of scale for everyone on the call, the gold part of the New Horizons spacecraft that you can see under the dome is about the size of a grand piano. It's about 10 feet across, sort of a triangle shape. So LORI is the long-range reconnaissance imager, and that's what we're going to be seeing a lot of tonight. In my day job for MDA, which I am not here on behalf of tonight, I'm working on the cameras that are going on Canadarm3. So I am very intrigued by this instrument. This is far bigger than what we'll have on Canadarm3. But the Long Range Reconnaissance Imager is a telescope with a camera on the back of it. I'm sure there are some astrophotographers on the line here, and this is astrophotography at its best. So when the New Horizons spacecraft is going to fly by Pluto, sorry about that, it is going to be at about a distance of several million kilometers, which is much further away than the moon. So if you can imagine flying by on your spaceship on the moon, seeing the moon and the Earth, and trying to get good photos. And you're flying by at several times the speed of sound. So the Long Range Reconnaissance Imager, the whole barrel of the telescope is tucked in nice and securely inside that grand piano body of the spacecraft. And when you're building spacecraft, it's important to protect them not just from the space environment they'll be in, but also from the people building them. As you can see here, everyone's dolled up in bunny suits, as we call them. And this is how we work with spacecraft. You want to protect it from yourself, debris from your skin, from your hair, anything like that can floating around in a spacecraft. This spacecraft will be in space for decades. Useful lifetime in space will be decades, millions of years it could be. And you don't want any sort of debris inside that spacecraft having potential to cause a short or break something. So everyone is very well gowned up. Here they're installing another instrument, but you can see that Lori telescope sitting there inside the frame. So the other instrument I want to talk about is the antenna to communicate the data back to Earth. Now, that might seem like the most boring part of the spacecraft, but that is an avenue to talk about one of my favorite things, the unsung hero of space exploration. So when we're communicating with objects out at the edge of our solar system, Voyager 1, Voyager 2 that I mentioned at the start, Pioneer, all those craft that are pushing the boundaries of our solar system, there's nothing out there to relay a signal. They all have to get it all the way back to Earth, all that distance. And these probes don't have the luxury of a lot of power. And so the Deep Space Network is the early stages of space infrastructure. And that is a phrase that might be new to some people, but that's a phrase we're all going to have to come a lot more familiar with. So the Deep Space Network is an array of telescopes that are around the world, and they provide constant coverage of the night sky to communicate with the probes that are far away, be that Mars or be that beyond to New Horizons out by Pluto, now the Kuiper Belt. And I love this little graphic on the side. This says the Australia, Spain, those are two countries, and then Goldstone National Park in California. So you know this is an American image. So power, I mentioned that's a luxury. So this large black object sticking off the edge of New Horizons, quite intentionally far away from the spacecraft, is how we're getting our power. This is a radioisotope thermal generator, RTG, that's going to be the biggest word of the night. And nuclear reactors here on Earth take plutonium or uranium, and they take the heat from that, and they put it into water to generate steam, to turn a turbine, to generate electricity. In space, you can't fit a lot of that in a 300 kilogram probe. So you can turn heat from waste heat from nuclear decay directly into electricity. It is not very efficient, but it can be done. And it does provide a very useful way to power spacecraft in deep space. Out where where the sunlight is very faint, when you're out at Pluto, the sun does not look much different than the background stars. You can't power a spacecraft effectively with solar cells at that distance. We can quite reasonably do it at Jupiter right now. If anyone wants to Google JUICE spacecraft solar probes after this, those are enormous. And that's going to power that spacecraft at Jupiter, which is 4 times closer to the sun than Pluto is. So at launch, this will have 400 watts of heat, 400 watts of electricity, sorry. That's what we'll be able to generate from the spacecraft. But nuclear decay, by the time we get to Pluto, this will only have 200 watts of power. So it'll have lost almost half of the usable electricity from this, or usable energy from the RTG. Now, this is one area where nuclear power could save the world in terms of our space exploration. And that is an area where if we could all cooperate a lot better and work together to build better spacecraft, we could harness nuclear power to explore the space, to explore our solar system so much easier. So this is Alan Stern at the end of the line for the New Horizons spacecraft test. This is coming out of a thermal vacuum chamber. These are chambers I work with a lot in my day job. And he's given the thumbs up. It's ready to go. This is perfect simulation of the space environment. And the New Horizons spacecraft is ready for launch. So at the time, it was launched on this guy, the Atlas V Centaur rocket. And this was one of the fastest rocket, or one of the most powerful rockets that was around in the early 2000s. The rocket landscape is very different today, but most rockets are all fuel. And I'm not going to go through this diagram, and I apologize, it's probably not very readable on the screen. But most of what you see in a rocket is all just to get the tip top off of the launch pad. And not even all of that last graphic here is the spacecraft. So, and the rocket, or the New Horizons spacecraft, closed in the fairing just in the final days of 2005. Now, this is the last photograph we have of New Horizons. And this is another thing I really enjoy about working in space exploration. I work on the Canadarm in my day job. I have never seen the Canadarm. I will never see the Canadarm. My replacement will probably never see the Canadarm either. And that's how this works with space explorations. The people who will take over working these probes will never see it. We will have photographs of the Eiffel Tower, the Taj Mahal, the Golden Gate Bridge until they come down. We will never have another photograph of the New Horizons spacecraft. So that's something I really love about working in this field. And on those final days of 2005, off the launch pad, the Atlas V rocket took New Horizons on the first steps to Pluto. When the Apollo astronauts went to the moon in the 1960s, it took them 3 days to get to the moon. This spacecraft flew past the moon in 1/3 of a day. So it's a long way out to get to Pluto. And the first stop is Jupiter. This is a wonderful GIF. The purple line is the trajectory of the spacecraft. The blue line that it's about to intersect with is Pluto. And the blue on the right is where we started, here on Earth. And there's a red line in between those, and that is the orbit of Jupiter that we're going to use to slingshot the spacecraft around. We're going to use Jupiter's mass to pull it in the right direction to get to Pluto. Now, these types of maneuvers can only happen when the heavens align. If you miss the launch window, if you launch a week later, you don't hit Pluto, or you don't hit Jupiter, you don't get that tug, and you go careening off into the darkness of space, never to intersect with Pluto. So this led to one of my favorite lines that I quote to my boss at work all the time from Voyager PI Jim Bell, The only real deadlines are orbital mechanics. So we're stopping, first stop is Jupiter. Now, imagine for a moment you're going on a European trip and you know every landmark you want to photograph in Europe. You want to photograph Big Ben, Leaning Tower of Pisa, all of these. But there's one problem. You've never been to Europe. No one you know has ever been to Europe. You have no maps of Europe. You have no idea how far apart the interesting things are in Europe. You have no idea what you want to photograph when you get there. And to break the analogy somewhat, for our planetary exploration, there is light lag on the order of hours to the outer solar system. So this is where you have to rely on robotics. It is robots that have explored our solar system, and they relay it to us. So you have to time when you want your instruments on. You have to time your signals. You have to plan and prepare. And so our encounter at Jupiter gives us an excellent chance to test some of those cameras. So, and upon arrival at Jupiter, we got this photo. And I want to just dwell on this photo again. When people ask, what is your favorite photo? What is your favorite astronomy photo? I show them this. This is the photo of Jupiter, of the New Horizons spacecraft encountering Jupiter, just on its timer. We knew on this day in the early days of 2006 was going to encounter Jupiter. The cameras were to come on and snap this photo. Jupiter is in the background. The moon Io is in the foreground here. And it might, I really hope it comes through on the screen. If you look on the bottom right corner, you'll see Io. You'll see a small red dot and a blue puff. That is a volcanic eruption happening in our outer solar system. The solar system is geologically alive. There are events happening on a scale that dwarf things on Earth, happening all the time. This is a chance encounter with a planet for a timed photograph. And the exploration of Jupiter continued. We got photos of the big red spot previously scouted by the Voyager spacecraft. These were the best images we had of it since then. One brief note for scale, many, many Earths can fit inside that storm. I love this little photograph. These are the Galilean moons edited together. These are photos from that LORRI telescope, long-range telescope, taking photos at comparable distances to what it will be doing when it arrives at Pluto. So, coming back to our map, we started this at Earth, 1 astronomical unit away from the sun. We've just passed Jupiter, 5 AU away. We have to get all the way to Pluto, which is 40 AU away. We have to go 8 times the distance. And we're going to spend 8 years in the dark. A lot changes. This story, the building of this spacecraft started in 2001. That's when the paper got signed. And those last photos from the Jupiter flyby weren't until 2007. And we're not going to get to Pluto until 2015. So that's 8 years that you need to keep knowledge continuity. Imagine putting a team project on hold for 8 years, and you need to come back and execute this perfectly. Same problem exists as we talked about with the photographs, closing in New Horizons. That was the last time anyone was going to see it. And everyone else, for everyone else, that's hearsay. How this thing works how this thing is going to respond to new commands, new software, new technology, new generations. These are the working in deep space exploration. We will only have this problem more and more. I work on the International Space Station, which was largely designed by people who did their best work with 1980s technology. I am explaining to people younger than myself how a lot of 1980s tech works. A lot of this is passed on knowledge in a lot of ways. And don't worry, we don't just get stuck in the past, but things get better. We understand things differently. Our understanding of Pluto was different in 1930 when Clyde Tombaugh discovered it. It was different in 2001 when we launched, and it was different now in 2015 as we're getting closer to the planet, as the rendezvous is getting closer. Now, in the intervening years, there were a lot of discoveries. We discovered a neighboring world to Pluto, Charon, sort of a moon, we'll use that phrase, a moon of the planet Pluto. And we also had theories, could there be an atmosphere on Pluto? Was it large enough to hold on to gas like the Earth does, like Venus does, like Mercury barely does? Was it possible to do that? And so in the 2000s, and coming pretty close to the arrival of New Horizons spacecraft, the Hubble Space Telescope, named after my ancestor, Edwin Hubble, took a fantastic photograph of the Pluto system, Pluto and its neighbor Charon, and a few other things. So this was what we found with better images of Pluto. It was not one lonely world waiting on the edge of the Kuiper Belt. It was a 6-world system named for the rest of the underworld crew: Pluto, Charon, Hydra, Styx, Nix, and Kerberos. So all of these worlds doing an intricate 6-world dance. This is an astronomer's dream. This is an engineering nightmare. So with all of those worlds spinning around one another, those are the ones we can see. What about the pieces of rock, everything down from a golf ball to pebbles that are in between those worlds, that are being passed back and forth, that are being colliding and smashing up into smaller sand blasts? This is a problem called space debris, and this is a growing concern around the Earth, and it is a heavy concern in systems like Pluto, in that Pluto-like system. Now, this was not expected on the initial designs of New Horizons. They expected some level of debris, and you take your chances. But this was a much different environment that they were getting ready to encounter. So, a few days out from the Pluto system, the New Horizons spacecraft was woken up from its hibernation, and it was taking photos, it was doing checks, and it was calibrating itself. But they wanted to get better images of Pluto close up. Could they characterize the debris? Was it too late to course correct? Is there debris in their way? What could they do? And so they sent a lot of commands to take photos, and they lost the spacecraft. 3 billion kilometers from Earth, a project 15 years in the making, and 10 days away from arrival. And they lost the spacecraft. So what happened? What happened? Going back to our European trip analogy, they had sent too many commands. The computers on board were prepared to handle the routine commands of emerging from hibernation, getting set up, running initializing scripts. But in the flurry of panic to characterize debris or understand a scenario, there were too many commands sent to the computers that have a lot less processing power than that Nokia phone that was just on the screen. and it shut down, it overclocked, it overworked itself. So they still had 10 days. And in this process, engineers hard at work at NASA, Johns Hopkins University, and these stories don't get talked about, but around the world, people get consulted, other companies, experts around the world get brought in to help solve these problems. And so over those next few days, the boot up scripts were reattempted and they reconnected. They got contact again with the spacecraft all the way, the 9-hour delay out to Pluto. And at the end of June, they started to reconnect and they got the first telescopic images back and they watched their approach all the way through the end of June. Canada Day there in the bottom right corner, coming up on 16 million kilometers from the planet. And then just in time for 4th of July fireworks, rendezvous with the planet Pluto. This is the photo we started the presentation with. We're finally back here. Now we get to celebrate. We did the hard work. We built the thing. We got it there. Now we get to celebrate. Now we get the science. Now we get to explore this beautiful world. And this is the image that went everywhere. This was 2015. Social media was a thing. The internet was connected the world in a way that we didn't have when the rest of the solar system was explored. I think most people within a month had seen this hearts, the Pluto heart. So, like I said, we finally get to celebrate. This is NASA. This is at JPL upon rendezvous with the planet Pluto. Now, what did we learn? What did we discover at Pluto? So I'm going to walk you through some of the best photos and the things we know so far. And those are the best 2 words in science, so far, because this generation of scientists is going to study this data. And the next generation of scientists are going to study the Pluto data and say, no, we need better. We need to go back. So the first thing I want to show, this heart. Let's start with the heart. And so it immediately stands out. It's this sort of flat area, this pale area, surrounded by all this mottled texture. There's craters, there's different colors, there's topography. So a close-up view, we see sort of this cell-shaped structure, cells on the order of 50 miles across. So much larger than any sort of city in scale. But this bizarre, is this weathering? Unsure. Is there really weather on Pluto? We don't have superb answers for that. And this is that structure, those cell-like structures butting up against a mountain range here. This is at the edge of that heart, sort of the tops of one of those lobes. And right here, you can see almost a sharp boundary between mountains that are in the same scale of the Rocky Mountains of North America, immediately transitioning to this flat plain with sort of these wavy desert-like structures. This is unlike anything we've seen in the solar system. This is a similar region of that desert interface between this pristine landscape to the north in the photo, straight up, and this dark, rocky, cratered surface below. One way we understand how old objects are in space is by how many craters there are. Space debris hits things fairly frequently, and we can guess with some stability how old something is. This is a sharp interface between a very old surface on the order of billions of years old with a very young surface, millions of years old, captured in the same photograph by the New Horizons spacecraft. There is resurfacing mechanisms on the world of Pluto. These should not be possible according to what we had considered the mainstream of planetary geology. This was not expected in any way at the planet Pluto. Pluto was a cold, dark world at the edge of the solar system that we didn't need a photo of. Characterization of Pluto from Earth, we can understand that there's a surface of nitrogen. And nitrogen at the temperatures that are common on Pluto is solid, and you can build out of it. Now, if you try to build a tower out of solid nitrogen, it will collapse. You cannot build a bungalow out of solid nitrogen. But here we have mountains that, with the scale of shadows, we can measure to be on the order of size of the Rocky Mountains, that analogy I gave earlier. Now, this tells us these aren't made of nitrogen. The surface of Pluto has a different composition. Pluto itself is made of different substances. Now, worlds like Pluto, we believe, are remnants from the early solar system. And if they're not made of what we think, that can tell us a lot about, are these worlds from different places, or do we not understand how our solar system formed? Or is our solar system in much more constant states of change than we expected? And I like this photo. These are some of the crater marks that we can find in that heart-shaped surface. And this looks like that special kind of ice that only forms in part of the winter, where it's almost hollow underneath and you can just crack and press it in. Anyways, I really like that. And there was some color. We saw some color in those early photos too. Now, this was believed to be sort of, it has a high carbon concentration. That's what we can detect out of it. And the science is always being updated. And I will admit, I am not up to date on my Pluto geology. And so at the time that I can remember, there was thoughts that this was possibly solid methane, solid forms of methane. And what's most odd is that it seems to be transplanted from Pluto's neighboring world, Charon. The New Horizons spacecraft was also able to get some fantastic images of Charon on its way by. And what we see on Charon is some of that red substance that we can see some of as well on Pluto, only localized to certain regions. Is this perhaps interplanetary pollination from collisions of meteorites? We still don't know. Needless to say, this continues just further mysteries of these worlds out at the edge of our solar system. And Charon also seems to have distinctive regions where there are much older surfaces, like to the left in the photograph here, and to the right where there is different sort of cratering. This is a stripe of, this is using one of the other instruments on board New Horizons, and this is just a strip to measure how much this was detecting methane. This is the methane constant or detection system for carbon. And what we can see is it generally lines up pretty well with some of that red content on the surface. Now, I really like this image because we just have a stripe. The long-range orbiter was able to get a lot of surface area. Not every camera has the same aperture, field of view. And it just so happened that the instrument taking this data had a much narrower one and only got one stripe, or only got this set of Pluto. There remains a lot more of this world to explore. And this is the final photograph from Pluto. This is looking back, and that starlight that is not too much different from our sun than it is the surrounding stars gave us this view of Pluto's atmosphere. The predicted atmosphere was found after all, and it only happens during some parts of the orbit. Turns out when Pluto is closer to the sun, there is too much heat and the atmosphere literally boils away, only to condense again when it gets to a colder part of the orbit. And it happened to be in a nice frame of light and nice thickness to get this photograph. This is the Pluto sunset. So that's it. That's the last photo of Pluto we have. There's not another one. And we started this launch in 2005. February 2007, we passed by Jupiter. It was July in 2015, we hit Pluto. And then on into the Kuiper Belt, that unexplored region, the new frontier of our solar system. What other strange objects were out there? Now, in the years Pluto has, the New Horizons spacecraft has encountered objects, KBOs, Kuiper Belt objects. We won't discuss them in detail tonight. We don't have time, but it has got this fantastic photo of Ultima Thule. This is the furthest, one of the furthest photographs we have from Earth of a spacecraft, that a spacecraft has taken. And again, these objects defy what we expect. Ultima Thule here looks almost like the Rosetta Comet did, like two smashed together worlds. And who knows what else is out there. But this isn't about Ultima Thule or the other Kuiper Belt objects. This was a story about Pluto. And finally, we can cap off that initial run from the start. We had Voyager 2, and now Pluto, the New Horizons mission in 2015. The reconnaissance of our solar system was complete. But they had one more thing on board. I saw someone coming off mute. I know, we're not done yet. Clyde Tombaugh passed away in 1997, before the New Horizons mission had even been guaranteed funding. And with the wishes of his family and himself, a small part of his ashes were interned on the New Horizons spacecraft. And I'm just gonna read part of the inscription here. Interned herein are remains of American Clyde W. Tombaugh, discoverer of Pluto and the solar system's third zone. Patricia's husband and Alden's father, astronomer, teacher, punster, and friend. You have to have quite a sense of humor to have that make onto your epitaph. So, and I want to read you this line from Alan Stern from his book, Chasing New Horizons, which I highly recommend. This is in a real sense the capstone of the initial missions to explore the planets. Pluto, its moons, and this part of the solar system are such mysteries that New Horizons will rewrite all of the textbooks. And as we go out deeper into the solar system, as we set sail on these vast cosmic seas, I think of those photographs and the bits of Clyde Tombaugh. And humbly I ask you, what if we will reach these distant shores? Thank you very much.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Max. You're giving me goosebumps. That is the most fascinating talk. Thank you, thank you, thank you so much for doing that. I'll invite the members to put in their questions in the chat, but let me start off the Q&A session. You mentioned that your ancestor was Hubble.
Yes, yes.
May I ask you to expand on that? If you're comfortable.
Yeah, my grandma would love me bringing that up. My Edwin Hubble, the astronomer who the Hubble Space Telescope is named in honor of, my great grandmother was Hubble, and I don't know direct family who would have met Edwin Hubble, but we do attend the Hubble family reunions every 2 years. In another one of my outreach presentations, I have a couple photos of me at the Mount Wilson Observatory. So.
Oh my goodness, that's amazing. Oh my goodness, that is so cool. Any Canadian work or technological work on New Horizons?
So that's a great question. The Canadian style of things is we don't give ourselves credit for a lot of the space technology we develop. No doubt there are engineers who are scientists or staff, technicians who were Canadians. There aren't direct Canadian instruments on board. Some of the scientists are Canadian. I don't have any names offhand, but I know the University of Toronto is heavily involved in planetary geology, as well as the University of Western Ontario. And scientists from those universities would use this data currently in experiments and proposing new missions. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you for that. I think there are a few questions in the chat, Max. Would you like to take it away?
I had a quick question. A couple of your pictures show the RTG on the spacecraft, and I know that you know spacecraft design or have been involved in a lot. Some of the early pictures had a lot of dings on the RTG. I assume that's just a dummy RTG.
Oh, yes, that is an excellent point, Alan. Good eye. And I wonder if I see RTG a few times in the chat, but that's an excellent point because that is radioactive.
Yeah.
And you're exactly right. That is not the live, that would be very hazardous for people involved. But you do need the size and scale and mass of that object there. So the real one was just put on like a few days before, I believe.
Was it in the vacuum chamber? The one in the vacuum chamber appeared to be different.
Yeah, I believe it would have been in the vacuum chamber, or if I don't have that level of detail, but in the New Horizons book, Chasing New Horizons by Alan Stern, there is quite a saga about the RTG itself in because these are nuclear controlled, and there are a lot of, well, we'll just say, bad actors in the world, and there's a lot of protections that go into transporting those. So things can get lost, unfortunately. And I see a question. I'm just gonna jump to this one. Is it a son of the Apollo ASLEP? I'm afraid I don't know that acronym. If Ricardo from the chat is comfortable explaining what that acronym is, I don't know that one.
That's the Apollo science package that they put on the surface of the moon with each of the Apollo missions.
Oh, gotcha. Okay. Thank you. It would be certainly a similar technology.
Yeah.
Yeah, if not even a similar hunk of uranium or plutonium. Yes, I see a question. Can I get a copy of the pictures of the probe? I'm happy to pass along a PDF version of this presentation if people like, if there's interest in that.
You can send it over to me, Max, and I can distribute that. Thank you. Perfect.
And I don't own any of the photos in it. It's all, publicly available. Great. Does New Horizons have to orient itself every time it needs to send data or Earth, then swivel around to take photos? Yes, it does, Rob. Excellent question. So that's how most spacecraft would work. And so what they do is they will do that intermittently. They'll do a mode where they'll take a lot of data. They'll take lots of photographs. And then a lot of those photos I showed of Pluto, we didn't have for many, many months after the rendezvous, because those pieces have to be sent back pixel by pixel by pixel. And those, the space probe needs to stay trained on the Earth for months at a time. So a lot more of that happens when it's past Pluto. Are there any new missions in development on the scale of Voyager and New Horizons? So probably unlikely on the scale of Voyager, where we'll see so many rendezvous with planets. Jim Bell has an excellent book on the Voyager spacecraft, and that was a 1 in a million shot. We're not going to get that option for 10,000 years. But this leads to more exciting or differently exciting missions. So New Horizons, the focus was smaller, more focused. And I think we're going to see a lot more missions like that. JUICE, as I just mentioned, is the coolest thing going to space right now. That's going to explore Jupiter. Highly recommend checking out the launch of JUICE and following that mission closely. Heard 1.5 years to downlink all the photos of the flyby. That sounds pretty reasonable to me. And that might not have even been all of it. So mentioned spacecraft got lost. Yes, so lost in a few senses. So navigationally lost is one, but even loss of communication. That's what I more meant in the case of New Horizons. But you are right, spacecraft do lose orientation and then are lost in 6 degrees of freedom in space. And they have to use star pointers. A lot of spacecraft that I've worked on, they have star trackers, which are essentially just cameras that have a really good map of the sky in them. And they know from looking only at a few stars exactly the way they're pointed. So I just see one last question here. If there will be any plans for New Horizons to pass by other small objects in the coming years. If it is getting close to another object, there will absolutely be photos taken. And so I don't know what the odds are of that. The encounter with Ultima Thule actually wasn't even guaranteed up until a few months before. So just the amount of uncertainty we have in how to characterize outer solar system objects like that, that's only going to get harder as the spacecraft gets further and further away from Earth. But absolutely, if there are, we're going to get photos. So thank you very much. I'll stop the questions there and pass it back to yourself, Swapna and Alan. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I think there might be, is there another question?
Oh.
You're on mute, Larissa.
Larissa, you're still on mute. Yeah.
Yes, this wonderful quote, the only real deadline is orbital mechanics. Who is the author of this one? I miss it.
Oh, Jim Bell. I accredited it to him, but yeah, Jim Bell. He was the principal investigator on the Voyager missions. So.
Jim Bell.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Max. As a thank you, we will be sending our calendar, the RAS calendar, to you. It'll be in the mail tomorrow, I promise. And thank you so much. It's been, your talk has just been fantastic. We look forward to the slides, and once I receive them, we will be sure to send them along. And I know at some point, Alan's going to put the recording up for those members who couldn't make it today. We thank you so much, Max, for joining us. I think the members are going to stay on for some announcements. Thank you again, and we'll talk shortly.
Wonderful. Thank you all very much for having me, and all the best with everything in your lives. So talk to you all soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Max. Just a couple of announcements before we end the meeting. We are uncertain of the status of our next 2 meetings. We are meeting with UTM. They were unable to book rooms for us because their meeting system wasn't updated with all the room requirements. So we hope to have that lined up before our next meeting. Our next meeting is Potpourri on February 10th. But the really important one is the annual general meeting on February 24th. So I'd appreciate it. We would all appreciate it if you could make an effort to attend, either Zooming in or UTM. If we are at UTM, we will do a combined meeting where we also make it available via Zoom. And just one final note that the astrophotography contest is now closed. We had a pretty good response. I don't know, I'm going to put you on the spot, Rob. Did you want to comment on the number of submissions, or do you not have that?
Yes, it was around 36, actually, maybe 40 submissions in total out of, so we got most of the categories taken care of and a few examples of each, both in the masters and the general and the youth. So that was, I think it's, we had a good reception of submissions.
That's great. Okay. Well, I will have this meeting up in case you want to review it or for access for other people. So I hope that everyone has an excellent weekend.
All right, thanks, everybody.
Bye, guys.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, bye.
Good night.
Bye. Good night.
Night, everyone.